Story 1: The Forgotten Locker. I never really believed in ghosts or the supernatural. I mean, high school is scary enough without worrying about things that go bump in the night. But my junior year changed all of that. You see, it all started with a locker. Locker 137, to be precise. The rumor was that no one ever kept that locker for more than a week. Something about it made people uneasy. Some said it was cursed. Others said it was haunted by the ghost of a girl who died in the school back in the 80s. I never gave it much thought until one day, my best friend, Jenny, got assigned that locker. Jenny was always the brave one. While I would jump at the sight of my own shadow, she would laugh and charge ahead. So when she got locker 137, she just shrugged it off. "It's just a locker," she said, rolling her eyes at the superstitions. The first couple of days were fine. But then weird things started happening. It began with small stuffed books and notebooks would go missing and then reappear in strange places. One time her gym clothes were soaking wet even though her locker was completely dry. Jenny brushed it off as pranks from other students. Then came the notes. They were always scrawled in a shaky hand, written in red ink that looked disturbingly like blood. "Stay away," they would say. Or "She's coming for you." Jenny was freaked out, but she didn't want to show it. She was determined not to let the rumors get to her. One afternoon, we stayed late after school to work on a group project. The school was eerily quiet, the halls echoing with our footsteps. We were joking around when Jenny realized she'd left a textbook in her locker. She groaned but headed back to get it. I went with her because, well, I wasn't about to be left alone in that creepy old building. When we got to the locker, something felt off. The air was cold, and I swear I heard a faint whispering sound, but I couldn't make out the words. Jenny seemed to notice it too, her hand hesitating on the lock. She spun the combination and pulled it open. Inside, it was pitch black, like unnaturally dark. Jenny reached in, and I could see her hand disappear into the darkness. Suddenly, she yanked it back, her face pale. "Something grabbed me," she whispered, her voice shaking. I peered into the locker, but all I could see was darkness. I grabbed her hand, ready to bolt. But before we could move, a loud bang echoed through the hallway. The locker door slammed shut on its own. We screamed and ran, not stopping until we were outside, gasping for breath. Jenny refused to use the locker after that. She reported it to the school, and they assigned her a new one. But the nightmare started soon after. She kept seeing a girl, drenched and pale, standing at the foot of her bed. The girl would whisper, "Help me," over and over again. Jenny's grades started slipping, and she looked constantly exhausted. One day, she didn't come to school. I called her, but there was no answer. I went to her house, but her parents said she was in her room and didn't want to see anyone. That night, I woke up to my phone ringing. It was Jenny. Her voice was faint, barely a whisper. "I need you to come to the school," she said. "Please hurry." I knew it was a bad idea, but I couldn't leave her. I grabbed my jacket and snuck out, heading to the school. The place was completely dark, but the main door was unlocked. I made my way to locker 137, my heart pounding. When I got there, Jenny was standing in front of it, her back to me. She turned slowly, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "She won't leave me alone," she said. "She says I have to take her place." I didn't understand what she meant, but before I could ask, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, rusty key. "This was in my locker this morning," she said, handing it to me. "I think it's for the basement." There was an old basement in the school, long since abandoned. No one ever went down there, but something told me we had to. We found the door and used the key. It creaked open, revealing a staircase that led into darkness. We descended, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, we found a small, dusty room. In the corner was an old locker, identical to the ones upstairs, and sitting in front of it was a diary. Jenny picked it up and started reading. It belonged to a girl named Emily, who had gone missing in the 80s. She wrote about being bullied, about how the other kids would lock her in the basement as a prank. One day they locked her in and forgot about her. She died there, alone and terrified. We looked at each other, horror dawning on our faces. Emily's ghost had been trapped, seeking revenge on anyone who used her locker. "We have to set her free," Jenny said, tears in her eyes. We opened the locker, and a cold gust of air blew out. For a moment I thought I saw a shadowy figure, but then it was gone. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive feeling lifted. The next day, locker 137 was empty, and the school decided to seal it off permanently. Jenny's nightmares stopped, and she slowly started returning to her old self. We never talked about that night again, but sometimes I see her looking at the spot where the locker used to be, a haunted look in her eyes. And as for me, I steer clear of anything that looks remotely like locker 137. Some things are better left forgotten. Story 2, The Substitute Teacher. It was my senior year of high school when Mrs. Thompson, our history teacher, went on maternity leave. We got this new substitute, Mr. Jenkins. He was strange, to say the least. Tall, lanky, with an old-fashioned kind of style, like he'd walked straight out of the 1950s. But it wasn't just his appearance. There was something off about him that no one could quite put their finger on. Mr. Jenkins had this eerie calmness about him. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it never reached his eyes. His voice was flat, almost robotic, as if he was reading from a script. The first day he walked into our class, the room seemed to get colder. We all felt it, but no one said anything. High schoolers are good at pretending things are normal, even when they're not. Things got weird fast. For starters, Mr. Jenkins never seemed to eat. During lunch, he'd sit in the classroom, staring out the window. One day, curious, I decided to sneak back to the room. I peeked through the door and saw him just sitting there, perfectly still, not blinking. It gave me chills. But it was what happened during class that really freaked us out. Mr. Jenkins had this old, tattered leather briefcase that he carried everywhere. One day, he opened it to pull out some papers, and I caught a glimpse of what looked like old, yellowed letters and photographs. I didn't think much of it until one of my classmates, Lisa, went missing. Lisa was the type who always volunteered to help the teachers. She stayed after class one day to help Mr. Jenkins clean up. That was the last time anyone saw her. The police were called, her parents were frantic, but she had vanished without a trace. The whole school was on edge, but Mr. Jenkins carried on like nothing had happened. About a week later, I stayed after school for a project. The halls were nearly empty when I saw Mr. Jenkins heading towards the basement. I don't know what possessed me, but I decided to follow him. He walked with a purpose, his footsteps echoing in the deserted hallway. He unlocked a door that I had never noticed before and disappeared inside. I waited for a few minutes before my curiosity got the better of me. I crept to the door and found it slightly ajar. I pushed it open and slipped inside. The basement was dimly lit, with a musty smell that made me gag. I followed the faint sound of Mr. Jenkins' voice. He was talking, but I couldn't make out the words. I peeked around a corner and saw him standing in front of an old, metal door. He was holding one of those yellowed letters, speaking in a language I didn't understand. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and a cold draft rushed out. Mr. Jenkins stepped inside, and I knew I had to see what was in there. I waited until he was out of sight, then crept up to the door. I peeked inside and nearly screamed. The room was filled with old furniture and dusty books, but what caught my eye were the photographs on the walls. They were of students who had gone missing over the years. And there, in the center of the room, was Lisa. She was standing perfectly still, her eyes wide and unseeing. I stumbled back, and the door creaked. Mr. Jenkins turned, his eyes locking onto mine. I ran, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath. I knew I had to tell someone, but who would believe me? A creepy substitute teacher with a room full of missing students? It sounded insane. The next day, I decided to confront him. I waited after class until everyone else had left. Mr. Jenkins, I said, my voice shaking. I know what you're doing. I saw Lisa. He looked at me with those cold, empty eyes and smiled a real, genuine smile that made my skin crawl. You shouldn't have done that, he said softly. You should have left well enough alone. Before I could react, he grabbed me and dragged me towards the basement. I screamed and fought, but he was surprisingly strong. He threw me into the room and locked the door behind me. The air was thick with dust, and I could hear the whispers of the missing students. I don't know how long I was in there, but eventually I found a way out. There was a loose panel in the wall, and I squeezed through, emerging in a janitor's closet. I ran straight to the principal's office and told them everything. The police were called, and Mr. Jenkins was arrested. They found Lisa and the other missing students in a trance-like state, but alive. It turned out Mr. Jenkins wasn't his real name. He was some kind of drifter, using fake identities to get jobs in schools. No one knows how he did it, but the students eventually recovered, with no memory of what had happened. As for me, I transferred to a different school. I couldn't stay there, not after everything that happened. Sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the whispers of the missing students. And I can't help but wonder how many other schools Mr. Jenkins visited before ours. Story 3: The Haunted Prom Night. Prom night is supposed to be the highlight of your high school years. For us, it turned into a nightmare. It was my senior year, and everyone was buzzing about the upcoming prom. The theme was Enchanted Evening, and the school gym was being transformed into a magical wonderland. A week before the prom, rumors started spreading about the old gym. It had been closed off for years, ever since a tragic accident back in the 70s. A girl named Clara had died in a fire that broke out during a dance. Some said her spirit still haunted the place. Of course, we didn't believe in ghosts. It was just a spooky story to tell at sleepovers. But then strange things started happening. Decorations would go missing, only to reappear in the old gym. Lights flickered, and cold drafts swept through the halls. It was all easily explained away, but it added a creepy vibe to the prom preparations. On the night of the prom, everything seemed perfect. The gym looked beautiful, and everyone was dressed to the nines. I went with my boyfriend Mike and our group of friends. We were having a great time when the lights suddenly went out. There was a moment of confused silence, and then the emergency lights kicked in, casting an eerie glow over the room. People started whispering and looking around nervously. That's when we heard faint music coming from the direction of the old gym. It was an old, scratchy tune, like something from a 1940s record player. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to check it out. A group of us, me, Mike, Jenny, and a few others made our way down the dark hallway towards the old gym. The door was slightly ajar, and the music grew louder as we approached. I pushed the door open, and we stepped inside. The room was bathed in a soft, flickering light, and in the center, a figure was dancing. It was a girl in a vintage prom dress, her back to us. Clara, Jenny whispered, her voice trembling. The girl stopped dancing and slowly turned to face us. Her eyes were hollow, her face pale and sad. She looked at us with such sorrow that my heart ached. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. We stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Then the music stopped abruptly, and the room plunged into darkness. I felt a cold hand grab mine, and I screamed. Mike pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The girl was gone, but the room was still icy cold. "We need to get out of here," Mike said, his voice shaking. We hurried back to the main gym, but the atmosphere had changed. People were uneasy, and the lights flickered ominously. It was like Clara's presence had followed us. We tried to tell the chaperones, but they brushed it off as a prank. The rest of the night was tense, with everyone looking over their shoulders, expecting something else to happen. When the prom finally ended, we all felt a sense of relief. But that wasn't the end of it. Over the next few days, strange things continued to happen. People reported seeing Clara's ghost in the hallways, and objects moved on their own. The school decided to hold a seance to try and communicate with her, hoping to put her spirit to rest. The seance was held in the old gym, with a local medium leading the session. A group of students and teachers gathered, holding hands in a circle. The medium called out to Clara, asking her to show herself. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the temperature dropped, and the lights dimmed. A soft glow appeared in the center of the circle, gradually forming into the shape of Clara. She looked at us with those sad, hollow eyes. "Why are you here?" the medium asked gently. "I was waiting for my date," Clara replied, her voice echoing. "He never showed up. I've been waiting for so long." We all exchanged uneasy glances. The medium continued, "What can we do to help you?" "Let me dance," Clara said. "One last dance." It was such a simple request, and yet it filled me with dread. The medium nodded, and we all stepped back, giving Clara space. The music started again, the same old scratchy tune. Clara began to dance, her movements slow and graceful. As she danced, her form became fainter, the glow dimming. By the time the music ended, she was gone. The room warmed up, and the lights returned to normal. It was over. The school eventually sealed off the old gym for good, but the story of Clara's last dance spread quickly. It became a legend, something to scare the freshmen with. But for those of us who were there, it was all too real. Even now, years later, I can't listen to that old song without thinking of Clara. I hope she found peace, wherever she is, and I'll never forget that haunted prom night when a ghost from the past came back for one final dance.